Empirical Labs has a freaky side. Let's check it out. Who better to demo the Big FrEQ than a freak like yourself, John? Welcome.
Ooh.
I'm just going with all the cringy intros for this. We're talking about the Empirical Labs Big FrEQ plugin today. The amazing John Paterno is here to show it to us. Can't think of anybody better for this one. John, thanks for being here. I'm going to cut right to your screen.
Thank you, Mark.
And we can freak.
Here we are, the Big FrEQ in action. This is my bass preset. So there's one or two things that are going to be different when you open it up, like these green guys on mine. I leave them on all the time. But it's basically functionally the same exact thing you're going to see when you get your hands on it. So
by bass default, you mean like this is your default as when you pull up the plugin, not like your bass guitar preset.
Right. So basically the factory default looks like this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then my default looks like this.
Nice. So why do you have it set up this way when you started up? Because I noticed like some cute things changed. The width of the bands changed.
So when I find plugins that I use a lot, and this has become one that I use quite a bit, there are certain tendencies that I have that I'm going to want to go to each time. And instead of every time opening it up and it's the factory preset, and like, little things like all the EQ buttons are not in on the factory preset. And those kinds of things really kind of make me crazy. It's funny. It doesn't look like the EQs changed, and I'm wondering, they may have kept. I did help Dave beta test this, so I'm wondering. It looks like they kept my EQ points because these are where I would normally kind of set this stuff up. So that's kind of funny. But yeah, and I also leave the finisher engaged, and I leave the oversampling up, and we'll get into those features in a few minutes.
Awesome. Would you say that it freaks you out when they don't do those things?
Boom. There we go.
All right.
It's going to be a freak fest. Here we go.
All right, what are we listening to today? What's the track?
Okay, this is a piece of music that I've written. Got kind of guitar oriented, with some drum loops, drum machine kind of feel, some percussion, and a bass part. And this is kind of the chorus section where it gets a little bit on the louder side. So let me just play a little bit so we get a little context going.
Cool.
All right. So, we have a couple of different sounds that we could kind of try it out on first. Let's try it on the kick drum first and see what this gets us. Let me get it going right away on the bass drum. And let's talk about some of the features because it does some really cool things. So you have 6 bands of parametric EQ. You can adjust the width of the Q. You can adjust the slope of the Q. You can enter in numerically frequencies and gain. If you know where you want to go, that's super easy to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a high pass filter that's adjustable with slope and also the Q factor. And that can be really cool if you want to dial in, say you wanted a little bump in the corner frequency. You can literally do that with the Q function.
Cool.
And then change the slope at the same time. You can really get interesting curves around these points.
Mm-hmm.
So that can be really useful. There's a low frequency shelf as well. Hold on, let me get this off. Yeah, helps if I engage it. Low frequency shelf. I don't remember exactly where the corner is. It looks like it's somewhere around 250, 300-ish. I would read the manual for that. Low pass filter, same idea. We got Q point, we've got slope and Q. We've got a high frequency shelf. And again, let's see, corner looks like it's somewhere, it's pretty gentle, starting like 2, 3K. We have a phase button that glows bright orange, so we know. So if we need to invert the polarity, we have it there. Output gain. And we also have this cool function called the finisher, which adds some harmonic distortion to the signal. And you can game that up and you can increase the amount that you use. And it does something really interesting. It's not quite compression and it's not quite distortion. It's kind of somewhere in between, kind of levels things out a little bit and sometimes can just smooth things out in a really cool way. Um, he's got an oversampling function on here for that. It just sounds better as you get more oversampling involved. And that's why he ended up putting it on there. But of course, more oversampling, you have more DSP use. So I think they wanted to keep it flexible so that if you use a lot of instances, if you're not using this function, you can kind of save on some of your DSP use.
So it looks like
Right.
6 bands, 2 shelves with filters on it, and the finisher, which I
Yep.
believe was your wrestling name in high school.
The finisher. Ooh.
It's gonna keep coming with the dad jokes.
We're just, yeah, this is going to be, no, I
This
don't
is
even
gonna
want
be
to say the
cringy.
F word again. Free core finish at this point.
Right.
But anyway, so let's take the bass drum and just give it a quick listen and let's see how we can shape the tone of the bass drum just with our little friend here. Okay, we got a 4-bar loop and here we go. That's one way to get some more bottom. And then now check this out. And this is what I love about using this high pass and the Q function. So let's take that out for a second. Let's go into high pass mode and let's start out kind of low and with a pretty decent slope. Yeah, let's go to 72. What the heck? We're all among friends. Let's get into Q mode and let's start Q where it's kind of flat. And now let's let's play it again and then let's increase the Q factor and the corner and see if we can get a similar result on the low end. With the high pass in the corner, now here it is without the high pass and with the gain boost. So if you had a sound with a lot of subs and a lot of low frequency content, you may opt to go for this high pass version versus using just a wide bell gain like I'm using here. Also, we can change the slope of the curve. You see how the other nice thing that this does is it does this flattening out up at the top, right? So you have more gain over a wider area around your center frequency.
Mm-hmm.
And that does some interesting things as well. So let's go back to where we were. Let's go back to the full bell. And then let's turn this up and see what this does. It's not as dramatic because there's just not a lot of low frequency content to this sound to begin with, but I think you can hear a little bit as I increase the flatness of the cue point, we're getting a little bit more low end out of the situation.
Yeah. And it's not, resonating on a particular frequency or a note as much.
Exactly. Exactly. And then as we increase the width, let's see what happens there. So you can get some very different sounds in the extreme settings, and it just goes to show you the power of this plateau versus the hill
Right.
that you can get. So it's a really cool, interesting function, and I think that the more you play with it, there's definitely some useful aspects about it.
Yeah. What are some cases where you would want to go for the Big FrEQ instead of, say, like the FabFilter Pro Q?
This EQ to me has a bit of a sound to it.
Mm-hmm.
The Fab Filter EQ is really cool, right? And as a repair tool in particular, I think it really, really shines. But when I want something that's got a little personality to it, that's got a little bit of mojo,
Yeah.
I tend to lean more towards this or even the AE 600 by McDSP. That's also another one of my favorites. But I'm really liking the musicality of this EQ.
Yeah.
That the way that I turn it, and it's just a pleasing sound, and it just has to do with the way the filters are designed and how everything interacts.
Yeah.
So uh, that's kind of the big thing for me. I mean, you can get surgical with this as well, and one of the cool things that they've done about this with this is this little section in the center. Tell you what, let me bring up another sound. Let me see one that might be a little bit more difficult to work with. Let me just bypass this, get it back to where it was. Let's listen to the track for a second. All right, let's look at this guitar for a second, right? It's got a little hair on it. So it might be interesting to deal with some of that and maybe get rid of some of it. First thing I want to do is try and zip in on that area where it might be a little fuzzy. And let's see. So as I'm turning the knob, you can see how much the frequency jumps, right? It's 6/4, and then I go. If I'm moving with any type of velocity, it moves pretty quickly. But that 6/4, 6/5 area is kind of where I'm hearing some resonance that I might want to deal with. So what's cool about this EQ is I hit this F button and it throws that frequency right up the middle, and it gives me much finer control over it. And so I'm going to combine that with narrowing the cue a little bit more. And let me see if I can fine tune this area that I want to maybe duck out. So there's a weird kind of fizzy harmonic that's sitting on top of this, at least from the speakers that I'm on right now that I'm hearing. So I want to pick this frequency and I want to just duck it, and let's see what happens. So it's doing a pretty cool job of it. But you're hearing it a bit, Mark, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So equally at home, working as a surgical repair, repair-ish tool, doing subtractive EQ as it was adding like some.
Exactly. And then now, say I wanted to get a broader area of it. Keep it narrow, but maybe tailor the corners a little bit. So I'm getting a little bit more on the corners. And that's what's great about this slope function. I can literally just flatten it out a little bit more and change the shape right around my center frequency. So let's see what that does, if anything. It might be cool just the way it is, but the fact that we have this um, available is super cool. I'm hearing just ever so slightly.
Yeah.
We've got a high frequency, we got a pretty narrow band regardless, so I'm not expecting to hear a ton of it,
Mhm.
but when I crank it up all the way, I do hear a little bit, but I kind of like it with my original choice, so I'm going to stick with that.
Yeah.
But what's cool is you have these options to experiment with.
So I'm gonna pause you there because it's gonna be a little bit of story time with Mark. So we were doing a mix therapy session. So John does something called mix therapy. You can check it out. It's mix-therapy.com.
Exactly, yeah.
And that's basically like one-on-one mixing, lessons, just as like John and I are kind of doing back and forth right now. But we were working on something, and John, I had a FabFilter Pro Q3 pulled up, and John was like, why don't you try changing the slope on that? Because you can do that inside of the Pro Q, but you don't have a variable control like this. And that's something that's jumping out to me right now is like instantly useful. Because it's one thing when you're going in between the different, dB per octave selections that you have, but being able to kind of variably do that looks like a really powerful thing. Yeah.
And what I really dig is it still feels musical at the same time,
Right.
and it doesn't feel like yeah, it feels like it's adding to the sonority of the sound,
Right.
and that's always something that I look for, in all of my tools. So let's keep going on this just for a second.
Yeah. Yeah.
It feels like it needs a little bit more presence. There may be something in the lower mids we want to address. So let me just keep rolling it for a second. So I'm kind of liking that. And then let's see if there's something in the lower mids that can be kind of sorted. I'm just going to do it this way quickly, just give it a quick sweep. There's kind of some funny information going on right there. I'm going to narrow down the Q a little bit, see if I have the right spot. I think that's a good option. Let's see. Yeah, just a little touch. Now let's see what it sounds like in the track. That's pretty cool. And there's no reverb on it or anything. This is just a straight kind of raw sound. So
Yeah.
it's speaking in a nicer way than when we started. So that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. I'm curious what happens if you finish him.
I was just about to do that, Mark. You read my mind. See? Let's finish this off with the finisher.
Finish him.
Let me do it in solo first so we can kind of hear what's going on, and then we'll listen to it in the track. So obviously when we crank it up all the way, we get into a lot of distortion. But now, as I dialed it back, we got to a spot that felt kind of sweet. So let me play it and I'll turn the finisher on and off and let's hear what's happening. Okay, one more time. I'm going to take it down a little bit more. So at this setting, to me, it's sounding like it's just a little bit of glue.
Yeah.
So it's kind of compression, but yet not really. And when I have too much, it's taken some of the kind of dynamic quality about it, even though it's a distorted guitar, out of the picture. So with too much of it, I think it really does that. But with just this little bit, so now the real trick is going to be what happens in the track. So let's see what it's like this way. So we'll start with it in and then I'll take it out. So what does it sound like to you, Mark?
I'm hearing almost like a cleanup in the low mids and then just sort of like a rounding on the, almost as if it's making the peak that you have kind of going on around like 2K-ish there, just kind of smoothing it out a little bit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's taken off the front end a little bit of the attack. That's the way I would interpret that. And I think we're hearing the same thing. It's just a little different language. So
yeah.
I'm going to play it again and I'm going to keep backing off the finisher though, and see if I can get to a point where I just want to hear a little more pick on it. And let's see what happens. All right, let's compare these two. So there's very little of it on here, but I kind of like what it's doing.
Yeah.
It's that nice kind of happy medium between it being totally off and feeling almost like we're getting the pick and not a lot of body. And then even with just this amount, it feels like we're getting the pick and the body now. So
yeah, that's really cool. And when you had it dimed, that distortion characteristic, that's one that I've kind of been looking for in a plugin for a long time. Can we listen to that again?
Of course.
We can go in solo because it's probably useless in context, but
Let's do it in context first.
All
Come
right.
on.
Yeah.
Let's
Sweet.
get freaky. Ha ha ha.
Oh.
Oh,
A
that was
finisher,
bad.
some
Sorry.
kind of freaky combination of distortion and compression.
Yep. Mhm. All right, let's solo it up now.
Does this remind you of like a germanium pedal just being tortured at all?
A little bit.
You
A
can
little
completely
bit.
disagree. Like, and
No,
we can
no,
cut it
no.
out.
I
Yeah.
I can hear what you're talking about. There's a bit of yeah, the way it's fuzzing out. It's funny. It reminds me of that song "It's Magic" by that band Pilot. That's
Ah,
what it's reminding me of a little bit. Is that
nice.
kind of distortion quality? Hearing it off the top of my head and totally dating myself as an adult human being. So there we go. So let's do the same thing. Let's start with it down, and then as it's playing soloed, I'll turn it up. One more little bit with it all the way up. Obviously, we lose gain as it goes by, but yeah, it sounds like a starved transistor for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're starting to get those kind of square wave kind of harmonics going on top of it.
That is
So yeah,
really, really cool.
yeah.
I'm kind of obsessed with that because I don't know of another plugin that sounds that way on a distortion characteristic. Do you know of any?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head, other than like maybe guitar pedal ones. It does. You're right. I think it does sound like a guitar pedal in a
Yeah.
funny way,
Yeah.
and up at that range anyway. So
I love
yeah.
that sound. I totally blame Vance for my like obsession with that because it's all like that. Like the Sputnik pedal from Spaceman that he loves is totally that sound, and I haven't been able to find that. I've actually looked pretty hard like for that in the plugin. Can't
Oh,
find it.
cool.
Yeah, so that's really cool. So I'm just obsessing about diming the drive knob on it, but there's plenty more here. So yeah,
There is a bit more, but dime the drive knob, and then you've got the EQ to shape it on top of it all.
right.
So
Yeah.
all super cool. And if it gets too fuzzy on the top or you get too much harmonics, you can, put the low cut in and
Yeah.
yeah, or the high cut, sorry, low pass.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is basically the rundown of this guy, and this is how I use it a lot of the times, and it's really become a go-to. And I find it super useful and super musical. I was really excited when it came out. It's like it's not been out that long, and then you think, man, does the world need another EQ? And apparently, Dave Dern knew the world needed another EQ because it's definitely got something interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I just really quickly want to touch on the word that you're using, musicality. We've talked a little bit about this before, but can you explain a little bit of what it is that you mean by that kind of puts a little bit of substance on like why this is such a cool option in addition to like a Pro Q3?
That's a very good it's a very good question. It's kind of my equivalent of the word warm.
Mhm.
And I know that it could mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. So what I mean by musicality is that as I'm changing and adding gain or taking out gain, it's doing some things that in sonority, is that a real word? I hope it is, with the audio that I'm trying to manipulate. And so whether it be adding some harmonics or it's phase shifting a little bit like EQs with personality do, in a way that feels like it's enhancing the sound. So that's kind of what I mean by the musicality term.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, man, Empirical Labs is so good at that, because it's like when you think about the classic use of crushing a room with a distressor and getting it to pump and breathe with the groove, and that adding to things in a musical way, as well as all of the cool sonic characteristics that they're doing,
100%. Absolutely. I mean, that's the beauty about the distressor and the arouser, like the way you can really control the attack and the release on those things. It's very it allows you to be very expressive with it.
Yeah.
And I think Dave has done that on the EQ side here.
Yeah. That's amazing. I'm really glad that we did this, because I've been really curious about this one for a while and I haven't gotten to try it yet. So it's awesome to hear it and be able to hear it from your examples and hear you talk about it. It's really useful.
Fantastic, Mark. No, I'm glad. I'm glad I was able to show it to you, because it's been, like I said, it's been really, really useful to me. And it's great on CPU, and you can use a ton of them, and it has the phase button. So
awesome.
There you go.
And it has a phase button. That's it's a big feature for you.
It is a big feature for me. If you're doing multiple mic things, it's always something very, very handy to have.
Yeah.
And it's nice that it's there, very easy to grab. You can see it, and you know immediately when it's engaged and when it's not. So
yeah. Well, actually, okay, so this it may be basic and off topic, but you have talked about before, like wanting phase buttons on EQs, and what is it about it being on an EQ that's important? Yeah, obviously we don't have it on tracks and Pro Tools yet.
Right. I mean, you can always throw a trim plugin on and get one. It's just as part of the kind of process of going through and prepping tracks for mixing. You're kind of EQing, you're checking the phase, you're doing all these things kind of at once, especially on drums. And if the buttons are there immediately on the plugin, it's just like you don't have to add another thing on, you don't have to go searching around for it. It's just right there. And you don't have to, if you have something open, like I don't have to open another window to get to it. I don't have to install another plugin to get it. It's just there.
Yeah. And an EQ is probably going to be one of the first things that you have open on a track. And so if you're checking
and these things sound, they sound great on drums. They sound great on kicks and snares and overheads. And those are probably the first 3 things that you're going to try and manipulate and make sure things are in phase as you go forward. So so to have that stuff there, it just makes life way, way easier.
Awesome. Cool.
Yeah.
John, thank you so much for coming on the show and showing us your freaky side. I got another one in.
You did. Yes, you did.
Cool. John, thank you again. If you guys want to find out more about John, where can they go?
They can go to johnpaternomusic.com, and then also the mix therapy thing, mix-therapy.com.
Awesome. Thanks, John. We'll see you guys next time.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark. See ya.